Welcome, everyone. People are still dropping in, but I think for time's sake, we won't wait any longer. Glad to see so many people already joining the session. Well, it's on mapping out stakeholders and food system. My name is Jacqueline Broersen. I'm a professor of innovation and communication at the Vrije Universiteit in Amsterdam, the Athena Institute, and involved in the Clever Food project. My co-presenter today is Leon Veenstra, and he will briefly introduce himself when he picks up where I left off. What are we going to do? First of all, I would like to stress that this is the first webinar in a series of 5 on public stakeholder engagement. We will go briefly into the background. So why engage with the public and stakeholders, and how to engage with public and stakeholders, but more in an abstract way, before going into the Food 2030 toolkit as a support structure for engaging publics and stakeholders in food system transformation. And this actually is one of the parts of the toolkit that we will present today. And I think very important anyway, is the user case. And Leon will say more about that user case in the Amsterdam Metropolitan Area, where quite a number of these tools for stakeholder analysis and food system analysis were used in practice. So he will really be able to provide you with more of the very concrete things that and what it will look like or could look like on the ground. So, but first the background. And at the end, I didn't write it down, is the possibility we have left around 10 to 15 minutes for discussion, question and answers, and those types of things. So we will make sure to keep time, so we will have an interactive part of this as well. But for the first part, we will be more sending, unfortunately. So the background. Well, why engage with the public and stakeholders? Well, you could say, first of all, well, it's a requirement in many of the calls for proposals of the European Commission and other funding agencies. Increasingly, you will see statements like the proposals must apply the multi-actor approach and ensure adequate involvement of certain types of stakeholders. So that is a legitimate reason to do that. This is what we call an instrumental reason, an instrumental consideration. Another one is that you would like to enhance the legitimacy of the outcome. And hopefully you may assume that by involving the public and stakeholders, it will increase societal acceptance or societal uptake of anything that comes out. But there are also other reasons for engaging with public and stakeholders. The other one is the normative consideration. Like in any transformation, it will affect society greatly. So we are going for radical change, or at least aiming for radical change. And it's the right of people to be able to discuss and engage in matters that affect them. So in that case, engagement is very much focused on the empowerment of public and stakeholders to counterbalance the threats to their interests that are at stake. Another important reason is actually substantive. Like people in society, public stakeholders, have experiential knowledge. And that may actually, when it leads to an explicitation of that knowledge, it can inform the transformation process and provide much more information about daily experiences with the context. But it can also be about values, that people provide opinion on why they think something is important, more important than something else. So in that sense, we feel that these three together, it's not that the one is more important than the other. We would rather say all three are equally important and should have a place in food system transformation. As mentioned before, it is because we're talking about radical change that is envisaged. So new governance models, innovations in order to realize this more regenerative, resilient, and plant-based food production. And since food systems intersect with many parts of society and the economy, we also need to involve a wide range of voices. So many people are involved in this for a well-informed, democratic, and sustainable path forward. Now, it's important to realize that bringing many people on board leads to diversity in many ways. First of all, a problem is never given. So defining a problem is always a matter of what we call issue framing. And people frame things differently depending on their background, their context, their worldview, etc., which leads to not only looking at the same thing in different ways, but also valuing those same things differently as better or worse. And stakeholders, if you involve stakeholders, will always bring their frames to the table, often they themselves being unaware of doing so. And the next thing is important to realize that controversy is central to any system transformation. So engaging with publics and stakeholders also gives you the opportunity to understand this controversy. And if you want to actually, in many of our projects, we want to facilitate food system transformation. So understanding this controversy by engaging with these different stakeholders is key to move forward. So how to organize engagement? Well, if you look at if you're going to do a bit of a Googling, but also look at different projects, you will see that particularly tools have been developed to facilitate this. So distinct tools about guidelines or a game or a certain specific description of a practice to help facilitate. And looking into those, we will see that they are often very scattered. And if you use the internet for it and try to click on some of the links, you will also find that some of them end up dead. So you end up with a page which is not active anymore. And that's what we see a lot, is that many of these tools are developed in the context of projects, and projects have a certain time frame. And after that time frame, they're finished, and they may be alive for a couple of more years, but often they die out and are not picked up. Now, Clever Food has been specifically, as an EU-funded project under the Food 2030 framework, specifically been set up to bring a lot of these things developed by projects together. And one of these things is the tools for public and stakeholder engagement, not alone, but here that's the focus for here. So Clever Food wants to provide such a systematic overview. And to that end, we had several workshops to try to find out how we could help practitioners to navigate this forest of tools. And also, what was a clear wish was also to provide practical use cases so that you can see how things work out in practice. Now, the toolkit. We have established the toolkit as a way to help these transformative spaces, especially policy labs, food councils, living labs. So those coordinating bodies that want to facilitate this transformation and involve these stakeholders and the publics. So that's the target group primarily of the toolkit, providing a range of guidelines and ideas and props. And we had some quality criteria in the sense that they should have been tested, that and they should be sufficiently generic for practitioners to be able to mold them to their own context, so that it's not too much to one very small area of application. This has resulted in the website, and you can see the link there. The slides will be provided to you, so you can also, but maybe it's also possible to put it in the chat. And it has recently been launched. So actually the background of this webinar is the toolkit. Now we distinguish certain objectives for stakeholder and public engagement. So on the one hand, you can use it to map the system, but you can also actually use stakeholders to do a stakeholder mapping. You can use it to do visioning and planning. You can do it to experiment, but also for continuity and scaling, and awareness raising in general as a kind of central activity that you would always like to do when in whatever objective you are. For today, we specifically focus on system and stakeholder mapping as a first step, as a base actually that we see as a base for the rest of engagement. This is what you need to do first if you talk about public and stakeholder engagement in the context of food system transformation. You want to understand better the context where you're in. What is this system? You want to know what are the key challenges and what are the gaps, what are the barriers. You want to see what's already going on. What are the agendas? What are the programs and regulations around this? And how can we ensure a diversity of stakeholders and understand conflicting points of view? Now, if you would go to the further into the website, you will see that you can click on a certain objective and then get a number of tools. So this is the page, and I here have listed again a link where you can see that some of the tools that we'll be discussing today. That are in total, there are, I think, at the moment, 8 tools under system and stakeholder mapping. And we will briefly go over some of them. So let's start with stakeholder analysis, stakeholders. One of the first questions you want to ask yourself is whom to engage. It's not a given, it's not out there. So who is or should be involved in the definition of that specific societal problem that your initiative is focusing around? And who should be involved in formulating solutions? And how can such a process best be designed, and how may it translate into concrete and legitimate collective action? Now, the definition of a stakeholder is an individual, group, or organization that is either affected by and or should be allowed to influence and or should be invited into the process of realization for transformation of the food system. And of course, should is a very normative one, because who says so? So then you need to think back into these different considerations of instrumental, normative, and substantive. So those are important criteria to think about whom to involve. Now, what you often see is that there is a participation of the elite publics and stakeholders. So those that are already quite active in that field and already have pretty much of a voice, but not necessarily are collaborating yet. However, you might also work with representatives of certain groups. And you might think about an NGO that is representing people that are in food poverty, or a representative organization of farmers or organic farmers. But then again, who are they speaking for? And are you sure that they are speaking on behalf of a larger group? You can also specifically think about, but who are the silent voices? In many of the projects, you see that actually the equity aspect, the just in the transformation, is this also a just transformation, means that especially these silent voices are quite relevant. But they are not silent for nothing. Usually they're not in any of the networks, so they're more difficult to reach. One way that is helpful of categorizing your stakeholder groups is by looking at the quadruple helix, which says we have actor groups around the private sector, we have actor groups around government or the public sector more, we have the academia, and we have civil society. But do realize there's a lot of differentiation within those groups. And you will see, and undoubtedly Leon will also talk about it, it might be sometimes a bit difficult to reach out to certain of these groups, even if they are more powerful, but maybe precisely because they are so powerful, they might not be interested in your initiative because they want to go their own way. What we often see is that, and what we also advise, is make a kind of power interest grid. So once you have identified your stakeholders, maybe also under the categories of the quadruple helix, it would be good to judge to what extent they are powerful around the topic and to what extent they have an interest in the topic. It doesn't necessarily mean they have an interest in your initiative, but they are interested in the topic. And then you can position them visually according to this quadrant. You would definitely like to get insight into each of the stakeholders' perceptions of the food system, their expectations and needs. You also want to know to what extent they are ready to participate in your initiative. And you want to understand the power dynamics. I'm very sorry, I'm getting a call on my, which is not so handy. Okay. For this, usually we say start with a desk study, then conduct a series of interviews, and then do brainstorm sessions. That you can do that in the form of focus groups when you want to have single stakeholder groups. At some point, you can do it in multiple stakeholder groups, so multi-stakeholder workshop sessions, to get an idea of this field of stakeholders. And then you need to decide in what way are we going to involve them? Will it be will it be in the center stage? Will we strongly collaborate with them and have them in the action mode? Or are we just keeping them more, will we actively consult them? Or will we just keep them informed? Here, there is the power interest grid is also often used to actually make give you a first idea for such different types of engagement. But do realize that in many projects, we actually want to liaise specifically with less powerful groups. So that means that it's not just because a group is on the right lower corner, it's just maintain interest. No, you want them to be at the core of your group, of your activity. And it might actually be that the most powerful groups are not the ones that are most active, most engaged in your initiative. So how you will do that is very much dependent on what you aim for. From that, you can create an engagement plan. And again, I'm not going into that in detail. It's more as an appetizer of what you can find in the toolkit. So mapping out food systems. Well, where to start? Because food systems are extremely complex. So the advice is usually to start just with the simplistic food supply chain. And we know that's not the whole story, but to start with it is very helpful. So start looking at food production, processing, distribution, marketing, consumption. And only after that go into more of the specifics around biological systems, expand to the political system, and then move on to the economic, social, and health. Key is that, because you're doing this together with stakeholders, that together with the stakeholders, you ensure their system thinking. And for that, within the toolkit, we have specific exercises which can help your stakeholders to trigger them in going into this system thinking, so they see the interconnectedness of the parts of the food system, see that there are feedback loops, trade-offs, and then you can anticipate things, but it's really not possible to predict anything. You can do this at different levels. So the national level is, in most initiatives, the highest level. You will most likely not necessarily go into the global, but national, city, regional, municipal, and neighborhood. When moving down, you more or less go to increasing levels of granularity. So you increasingly zoom in. And you can do that again with desk study, going to databases, conduct interviews, organize multi-stakeholder workshops, just to find out how these different stakeholders think about this. At city regional level, we often advise to do a resources or an opportunities map. Here you see an example of a resources map, but Leon will go into the details. What is this resources map and what can it do for you? At neighborhood level, there that's the opportunity to look, for example, at food environments in more detail. So looking at institutional food environments like school canteens, hospital meals, or the agri-food environment like community food gardens or small-scale organic farming, food forests, the retail food environment, supermarkets, open marketplaces, etc., etc. And you can conduct transact walks, interviews, focus groups, but also, again, multi-stakeholder events. Now, if you want to work specifically with food-deprived groups, there is a range of additional tools to how to identify these food-deprived areas, because usually this is in an urban area, this is place-based. We usually see specific neighborhoods where there are higher concentrations of food-deprived people. And one of the things to do that is vulnerabilities mapping, where you look at income, food insecurity, and child obesity levels. First separately, then you can make an index, and that index will give you the information on where the highest concentration is of people in need of more food security. And important is then to combine this next to see where how strong the local networks are in those neighborhoods, and see whether there are food spaces that can help you, can provide transformative potential. But working with food deprived households also means that you want to understand the power relations there. So what leads to these unhealthy and exclusive food environments? And for that, we provide the power tree of healthy food access. And there are 3 core questions. What makes a neighborhood food environment unhealthy or exclusive? What are disempowering roots of unhealthy food environments? And how can we make healthy and sustainable food accessible to all? And I will now hand over to Leon to provide a user case, and I will unshare my screen. Oh, in the meantime, I forgot to say, are people writing down questions already in the chat? Because that would be good. So if you have a question, because you might, of course, you might save it to the end, but also you can already write down your questions in the chat. That will also help us to pick out already some questions to work with. Leon, I think you can, yeah, perfect.
Yes, you can all see the screen, hopefully. So my name is Leon. Brief introduction. I'm a researcher in the FoodClick project that's been running for 2.5 years now. And I'm working at the Vrije Universiteit, just as Jacqueline. I'm working on the Amsterdam Metropolitan Area, one of 8 living labs that started off in FoodClick. And I'll be sharing a little bit about our mapping and gapping process, which took place in 2023. There we go. And I'll provide some context on that area, and I'll dive into the 2 methods that were shared before by Jacqueline. So mapping at the national and city regional level and the mapping of deprived neighborhoods. So for some context, the Amsterdam Metropolitan Area food system, this is, let's say, where our living lab is oriented, contains approximately 2.5 million inhabitants. It's a super diverse area. Amsterdam, but also the city of Almere close by, are known in the Netherlands as the cities that have almost the highest amount of nationalities. I think close to 195 actually. So food that's present, but also food cultures are super diverse, and that contrasts starkly in a way with the way that food environments look like. They're super no, they're very dominated by supermarkets, let's say. Supermarkets that sell often a more standard Western diet. And again, that contrasts with the production environment in the area. So the Amsterdam metropolitan area is mostly, in terms of its production land, characterized by, for example, dairy cows, milk production, but also seed onions and seed potatoes that are sold internationally all around the world. So there are some interesting contrasts there, and we were asked to map this out and get an understanding of what's there and which gaps exist and what potential is there for food system transformation. How should we go about that? We took the period from February 2023 to August 2023 for that, to map policies and planning frameworks, map stakeholders, and map resources, opportunities, and vulnerabilities of this city regional food system, and also neighborhood food environments and power relations. And together we thought these make an integrated approach. And I wanted to share the photograph on the left, one of our first fieldwork trips. We started off mapping in this neighborhood or community garden. And I think we were sitting there for half an hour, and then this enormous cruise ship passed by, which provides once again a stark contrast, I think, of what this food system is about. The food served on here is clearly not grown in community gardens. So where do you even begin doing such a thing? Well, I want to start you off at the national and the city regional food system level. There, our core focus was to figure out who to engage, who should be at this table. So who are the stakeholders that should be present? On the right, you can find a map of this Amsterdam metropolitan area that I'm talking about. In this area, 2.5 million residents. Who do they eat every day? All of them are in some way expert on their food, but we don't mean to speak to all of them. Instead, we need some sort of approach to find the appropriate stakeholders for our work. And as Jacqueline shared about this power interest grid, there's a lot of politics around who to talk with, who can we get a hold of, and who can't we get a hold of because of lack of capacities or lack of interest. So we decided to start by leaning on experience. We found a coordinator of a food policy network that's part of the project, FoodClick, able to share their network with us and actually talk us through who is active in each sub-region of this Amsterdam metropolitan area. Who do you find there? Who should you talk to? Who is doing what? In the same way, there are just examples. We spoke, for example, with a civil servant in Amsterdam who'd been engaged on the topic for 25 years almost. These were very useful resources for our key informant mapping, as we called it. People really with a helicopter view, people who had an overview and who could help us with snowball sampling. And that's then what we did next. So we collected an enormous amount of potential names to speak with, but then we had to in some way find a selection. And for that, this quadruple helix was very useful. So we found a way to see, can we get a sort of representative overview of people working as researchers, as policymakers, or in civil society or as entrepreneurs. And then one final aspect that we took into account in this stakeholder mapping was to actually look at specific target groups. That was something that FoodClick shared with us upfront, something that they said is very important to actually look at particular, for example, food deprived populations. How do you reach them and where do you find them? Ultimately, this led us to a list of interviews that included, as mentioned, these researchers and policymakers, but also people working for food banks, social workers, farmer cooperatives, and neighborhood initiatives. Concentrated around the Amsterdam area because almost half the people of the area live in this area, but also spreading more widely through Almere, the purple area on the right, but also the area over here and the area up here. And the outcome of that was a very interesting overview and intersection of themes and important topics, things that people brought up in conversations, things they shared were important and that were going on, opportunities, but also challenges of that food system. It also brought us trust. It built trust doing these conversations, and it brought us network, and it brought us a very diverse perspective on the problem understanding that people had about this Dutch food system. Partly based upon that, and there's a big gap in between that, but I wanted to share these maps with you. We made a resource opportunity and vulnerability map. So this resource map that Jacqueline briefly already showed shows the cultivated area of land and what it's used for. Is it, for example, grassland? Is it arable land? Is it horticulture, etc.? Data was luckily available on that. It's produced yearly on a national basis. So we could actually use it to show what is produced in this area and what kind of food is grown here. And I'll keep it short on these aspects because there's a lot to cover. And there was a lot of mapping and gapping conducted in this period. But we also conducted an analysis of policy and of governance aspects of this city regional food system. So we looked for the 32 different municipalities here. Do they actually have a food strategy? Do they have a specific alderman that has the topic of food in their political agenda? And are they participating in a food policy related network, for example? And there you could see actually a very interesting pattern appear. You could see that some municipalities also reported in conversation with us, we don't have any current political room to navigate this topic. We cannot really work around this. We don't have a food strategy. We don't have politicians who stand up for it, etc. While in other cities, you could see, for example, in Amsterdam, they have a food strategy, they have a food alderman, and they're participating quite intensively in the food policy network. That creates a very different starting situation if you want to do something about the food system. And then the opportunities map that we made ultimately focused on the institutional food environment. So we analyzed the amount of lunches served within the institutional food environment in each municipality here. And we looked at the total number of people working there and then looked at the proportion of that to simply actually have a conversation starter. And that's what all these maps were. They were conversation starters that we used on different multi-stakeholder workshops, in our visioning agendas later on, to actually see what's cooking in the Amsterdam Metropolitan Area and where can you start working. And that brings me to the next level because these are very general overviews of what's going on. They give some sort of thematic orientation of things that you could focus on, but we really didn't grasp the root of the problem and the way it was actually also perceived and experienced by people in neighborhoods, which is a very important aspect of what FoodClick is about. And to get more grip on that, we performed this multi-criteria analysis that Jacqueline also shared some more insights about. And we looked at some statistics that we had available. We also experienced that what exactly is available differs per country, differs per city. In Amsterdam, we could get some data, or in the Amsterdam region, on obesity in adults, in income, and on self-reported grip on life, as the National Health Institute mentioned it and collected the data. So this combination of factors gave us an overview of who was probably experiencing, or which neighborhoods were probably experiencing, lack of access to food, for example, lack of means to access it, and also perceive it that way, perceive it in a way that they struggle. And these were the neighborhoods where we wanted to focus our work, but also focus the interventions that are part of the project. And the multi-criteria analysis combined these aspects to get us a total score of where these neighborhoods are located. And that yielded us a list, and I wanted to show you this map. We focused on 3 areas initially: the area of Amsterdam North, the area of Amsterdam Zuidoost, that you find here, and Lelystad Oost. And as we did, I'm also looking at the time briefly. Luca, is it correct that I have about 5 minutes left before the questions?
Yeah,
Or...
that's right.
Okay.
Feel free to take a bit extra because you started later as well.
Okay, no, I think 5 minutes should be very doable. So we looked at these scores, and we tried to get in touch with the networks here and try to see who can we find access to these neighborhoods. And in Amsterdam, we found ways through civil society initiatives, through networks, sometimes with help from the municipality, to actually get in touch and start the conversation around these neighborhoods. In Lelystad, I wanted to share this example with you because it's fascinating. We contacted the municipality, but it was actually a municipality's lack of capacity ultimately to start interacting with us there. So we had quite a promising case. We were working on similar topics as the municipality was interested in. We wanted to actually also offer to help them mapping and understanding food environments and figure out what are people in these neighborhoods struggling with. But they ultimately shared with us, we don't have the capacity to work on that at this moment, which is completely understandable, of course. And that made us in the end switch to the city of Haarlem, which is on the other side of the Amsterdam Metropolitan Area, and where we did find both initiatives and citizens, as well as the municipality, interested to work with us. And that fits, perhaps to add to your understanding, the food click approach of going both via the bottom-up way of citizen initiatives, but also a top-down way of approaching policymakers, trying to find middle ground where they can start action learning. So that also to indicate to you that the small politics of collaboration are very important. Yeah, I can share with you, we had many conversations around which neighborhoods to go into and why and how to go about that. And the sessions then started to look like as what you see on the right. We started to really delve into neighborhoods and try to contact people and try to see, of course, people asked us critically, what are you coming to do here? What do you hope to get? And what's that going to cost us? That was sometimes a very challenging process in which we also were very sensitive, or tried to be very sensitive to the fact that we took people's time. We also tried to offer good insight, therefore, in how that may help, how that may help put the topic of food on the agenda, and to see how that aligns with the social initiatives that were going on there. And I wanted to give you 2 examples. As we delved into these neighborhoods, we tried to really find these transformative spaces and understand the local food networks that were going about. So on the left here, you see the city district of Amsterdam North, and we mapped, for example, informal food initiatives, but also formal food initiatives. Think, for example, of a food bank as a food aid initiative. There were also simply people cooking in their kitchen for 50 of their neighbors each week. We found neighborhood centers that had a kitchen that they always shared with a particular cook. But we also found spaces where food is grown, for example, specifically for the food bank or for social payment schemes so that people can actually get a share of vegetable harvesting, but for a social tariff so that it's actually affordable. And on the right, you can get an overview of the city district of Amsterdam Zuidoost, where we did a similar exercise and also tried to find what are these spaces and places, what are the transformative spaces where people are active and trying to change the food environment. So this was really also a matter of finding allies and coalitions of the willing in these neighborhoods, people that want to work on this topic of food system transformation, but perhaps lack capacity or lack money or lack political attention or lack something else in which we as a research project could be meaningful. And to really understand what people, because these were like physical understandings of these neighborhoods, of course, and that helps a great deal to have these physical understandings, but it was not enough to really talk about what was needed for transformation in these areas. And so we applied this power tree of healthy food environments, of healthy and sustainable food environments, actually. And there we really delved into what is the root of the problem as perceived by people in these neighborhoods. And we spoke with citizen initiatives, with social workers, with neighborhood organizations, but also with government policymakers, for example, of local governments. And next to trying to really understand the problem at this level, we also try to understand where people saw potential solutions. Now, this yielded us a great deal of data and a great deal of insights, a great deal of network. And by taking the time for this, it was a very time-consuming exercise. We also managed to build trust, not with everybody, but with many people. And that was what we really needed, those ingredients to further develop a trajectory for food system transformation. So things that I wanted to share with you as important outcomes of the work that we did was building trust with essential stakeholders, but also getting to the root of the problem, trying to really understand how people perceive the problems that they experience. And in that, food really should be approached as a nexus, as a place where societal problems come together. It's a place where essentially everything comes together. But food in that way also became a trajectory as a solution to us. So that was a very interesting perspective that we found. We also wanted to understand the potential for change, but in there also see the contested understanding, see how people want to move forward and agree or disagree on that, and where we can build these coalitions of the willing. We really learned good mapping takes time. As you can see from this presentation, I could go on for a very long time about all the things that we mapped. There was a lot of time needed, time invested. Having a really broad scope, something that was allowed and possible in the Food Click project, was very great. And that actually led us to be able to open up and create inclusive engagement, I think, because we did not pre-select to just speak with informal food initiatives, for example, but we can also engage with farmers, farm cooperatives, and really do a very broad scope of this food system, something that is required. But at the same time, FoodClick gave us certain directionality, saying to avoid selective sampling, and selective sampling particularly in a way that if you start engaging with stakeholders, it's sometimes difficult. It's sometimes challenging to get people around the table and to make them stop their, in a way, much more important daily business and actually sit down, perhaps reflect, think about, or talk about what is this food system, what does it mean to them, and how would they envision change in it. But it's actually very worthwhile to get these people around the table and to get these perspectives there. So that's something that we learned and that will continue to be a balancing act. I think that was the core of what I wanted to share with you. I hope it provides you some insights, but hopefully even more questions. I'll stop sharing the screen.
Yeah, great. Thanks a lot, Leon. I don't see yet any questions in the chat, but we can also give the opportunity to people. I think people can raise their hands as well. We have time now. Oh, here I see a question coming. Rainer Brown. Can you unmute yourself and ask the question personally?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Good morning, good afternoon. Really great work, and I think this is needed now to think in a systematic way and to identify the problems. My question is more related to this. Okay, Leon, as you mentioned, the mapping process takes long time to get the data, to clean the data, to understand who are the stakeholders, everything. So, and the maps are somehow great to communicate with people, to really give visuals to them, and to start the discussion. But I'm always wondering how can we use these maps, because they are only showing one layer of the problem, and the systems showing, let's say, how the problems are linked to each other. And how do you combine this data, let's say, the maps with actually the system? Because this is two areas of work in my
Leon, I
view.
think that's a good one for you, to how you did it in practice.
Yeah, but feel free to add from experience, of course. But I can start off. This is a great question and something that we, I think, still struggle with. The maps indeed are great for communication, and interestingly, we used a lot of maps for mapping. But I showed you a brief overview of this problem tree, which is not really a map-based approach, where we use the map as part of a communication, essentially, but use different ways to really get into the problem understanding and let people reflect on the systematic aspects of how perhaps their physical space, but also their food environment as experienced, which is much broader than just a physical space, comes about. So you are exactly right that we use these maps as a tool, and they have their limitations. There are certain things that they cannot show, and we found that in the work that we do now, if I may venture into that, part of the work that we do is still about the physical environment, but a lot of the work is actually also about building trust between people, for example. And that is something that's very difficult to show on a map. But yeah, in that way, we've tried to broaden and open up and use the maps. How do you say that? Use the maps accordingly. So say, not try also not to map everything, but keep some things, yeah, or try to show things in a different way. So, for example, do food transect walks and actually try to share experience through that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important to realize as well that mapping is not always in the form of a map. And also another thing is that in many cases data is lacking. It's simply not there, or it's behind private walls. You can't get access to it. So any mapping is flawed. You are in situations of uncertainty. So therefore also your interaction with stakeholders is important to get the best information that's there, because it's not out there in databases or anything. Yeah, so you do it in many different multiple ways of trying to collect data as well as to visualize it. But of course, Leon focused very much there, and it's always nice to show a map because it's so easy to communicate, let's say. Does this help, Rainer? Or
Yeah, definitely.
okay.
I see still there is potential work we all as community need to do to really because I think what will help in future is to come up with potential scenarios and also
Yep.
To get to some concrete numbers. I mean,
Yep.
if I'm just thinking on this wonderful map of Amsterdam, and there is a lot of that zoning can help, zoning regulations. So, and that's why I ask, okay, the food environment, how the BMI of people, how they are, and all of this zoning regulation on fast food
Yep.
restaurants and so on.
Yep.
So, but in the end, the question is, how much does it as cost? How can we transfer it? And what will be the impact? So
Yep.
there is
Yeah.
this is the kind of questions I'm
Yeah,
just
definitely.
thinking about, and I think it's a gap we, as I said, we as a community need to address in research projects.
Yeah. And I think this it also fits very much into the other objectives, because of course when you go into a collaboration, you also want to think about projecting the future, but also how do we make transformation pathways? How will we proceed? Where we will focus on? So how to prioritize, strategize. You may have a living lab where you want to try out things, where you want to experiment. So how do you then identify those interventions that are most likely to be catalytic in driving the food system transformation? So we will definitely get in other webinars, we will definitely go into subsequent steps. And I saw here another one from Johan Stein about have you in any way considered the movement of food products around Europe and its path through Amsterdam or other cities? And I know, Leon, you looked at that. So how do these commodities move, especially in the Netherlands, move out? But maybe you can elaborate a little bit on it.
Yeah, I think it's a very nice question. There are many different answers I can give now. So we looked at one statistic that we soon found or found at an early stage was that approximately 75 to 80% of what's produced in the Netherlands is exported or is intended for export. And the same number, the same percentage, so approximately 75% of the food we consume is imported. And that's on average. So this is hard to estimate, of course, for specific consumers. What we saw was, for example, in communities that originated in Suriname and that moved to the Netherlands, there was a wish to have access to food products from traditional food culture. And these food products were often perceived to be really expensive, much more expensive than other imported foods. So there were, for example, explorations to try and see, can we grow these foods here in the Netherlands, for example, in greenhouses? So that's where you saw these flows of food going from very global to very concrete, that there were actually questions around that. On a policy level, the topic of local food is considered to be very important. So policymakers have made policies around trying to get more local food, get more of that food that is produced around the city into the city. And it's really difficult to actually do that, it seems. And it's also not something that was reflected as a wish in the neighborhoods necessarily, except that people, and that's something that's reflected in another aspect. For example, look for local food production through gardening or through contact with farms. So there are many people from certain districts that go to farms to buy raw milk or to buy vegetables on subscription. Yeah, maybe that gives a bit of an overview of the way that this question came up in many different aspects, actually.
We have time for one more question, if that's there. You can also, yeah, Noah, this is the last question. In gatherings you have organized for stakeholders, how did you navigate the different layers of collaboration among stakeholders? between collaboration for short-term relief solutions and collaboration for long-term system transformation?
Yeah, that's once again a good question. And I would like to add to that as a research project, we are fairly short term, and therefore from the beginning have been oriented to try and find partners in interventions or in the design of interventions that can provide long-term grounding or anchoring to facilitate transformation. And it actually is a big struggle. So what we saw was that the municipality of Amsterdam, for example, was only capable of giving incidental money. Money for short term. In one particular intervention, they continuously spoke about short-term relief of food insecurity. While the initiatives that were working on the ground were saying this is just something that the neighborhood needs, and we want to work towards a vision where we have a community food environment where people just can access food if they need that. That is something that we want to provide. And the municipality is switching perspectives on this. They struggle to still try and find how to organize that because it is very difficult. And as the municipality also shared, we are not the food bank. It's not our core business, so to say, to do this. But you saw these things coming together in the multi-stakeholder sessions that we organized. People actually had conversations on it and say, now that I speak with you, why do you organize in this way? Why is it so difficult? Why can't you focus on those long-term solutions or that long-term design that we want? So the fact that these questions were asked and the collaborations that we make from that, you see that they shape the way that these stakeholders interact. And that I think is the aspect of the living lab that we try to organize. So we really try to make these topics the topics that we discuss. How can we, in this particular case, move from short-term aid to long-term system transformation? We are still working on that. So it's a long-term process. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's not something that's so easy to realize. Okay, thank you very much for joining the webinar. I hope it brought you some insights and also made you curious about the toolkit. We will have next sessions. The next webinar will take place on the 11th of June at 2 o'clock. And others will come afterwards, but this one is definitely set. It will be on most likely on awareness raising as one of the key continuous activities that you will need to do when you're trying to go for food system transformation. And don't hesitate to reach out to us. We are not only here now, we are there in real life as well. And there will also be face-to-face sessions organized within the framework of Clever Food at some point. So if you're interested also at some point in going to a conference and having some of these trainings more in real life, real interactive ways that you can actually practice with some of the tools live, that it is also possible. So keep posted. And we will hope to see you again. We have a survey out there. If you can provide us with feedback, that would be great. Thank you so much and hope to see you again. Bye.
Bye. It was nice.
Thank you.